Do you ever wonder how great leaders in the community make things happen? When they encounter new, unexpected challenges like a pandemic, how do they continue to successfully make an impact? Welcome to That Sounds Terrific, the podcast that connects you with these amazing people. Get insights on what they do to meet their goals, find out how you can help them in their mission, and learn their methods so you can be more successful at what you do. Welcome to That Sounds Terrific with host Nick Koziel.
Well, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of That Sounds Terrific. Joining me today is Kristan Wesidack, founder and chief behavior detective at BehaviorWorx of Southwestern PA. I'm your host, Nick Koziel. I'm so happy to have you on this episode, Kristan. We were just chatting last week, and I just love the things that you're doing and some of the things you're planning on doing. So why don't you tell the audience just a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you for having me, because I appreciate the opportunity to share my passion with the world, and you provided a vehicle for that. So thank you for being who you are and doing what you do. Cool. So my business is BehaviorWorx of Southwestern PA. So my primary passion is educating early intervention professionals and related mental health professionals about holistic approaches to behavior. So it's all about teaching, how does nutrition play a role in behavior? How does vision play a role in behavior? How does being born via C-section and disruptions in the gut and having mold in your house or lead paint or any of those things, how do they cause behavior? So really trying to get people to look at those things, because I want people to have better results while they're working with kids. So they're less burnout. We have better outcomes for kids, better outcomes for families, and we spend less on those programs because they're more efficient. And so I have been doing that for probably a dedicated effort for about the last year. I started in January of last year. I had 3 people show up to a training. It was divine intervention, I think, because it was in Greensburg here in Southwestern Pennsylvania in a basement of a church. Mm-hmm. And so what better place to start than a house of God?
Right.
And so I've grown my business. It's still just me. I'm looking to probably hire another person this week to help with advertising, marketing, content management, and pushing more trainings out on like the Teachable platform, just so that I can reach a bigger audience. But to grow my business and start the nonprofit that we had talked about too. So
yeah, tell me a little bit about the nonprofit too, because we talked about it, but the audience doesn't know anything about it.
Yeah. So my vision is to create a nonprofit that solves 2 of the main problems that I see in early intervention. And it happens in other systems as well, but a lot of families that have children with special needs eventually have to be gluten-free and dairy-free in their diet.
Right.
And May is Celiac Disease Awareness Month. For those of you who didn't know, I just posted some information to my Facebook and LinkedIn and my YouTube channel, but to bring more awareness to that. But because more people have to be gluten-free and dairy-free, that can be really expensive. And for families that are on, let's say, SNAP benefits, EBT benefits, it can be quite a challenge to meet those needs. So the purpose of the nonprofit is twofold: to help those families get access to gluten-free, dairy-free, whole organic foods, but also to help them pay for out-of-pocket medical expenses, which, as I see it, are the 2 biggest barriers to success from overcoming behavioral issues in those kids. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and you know, the barriers to access are usually what also helps that sort of like domino effect of, you know, families having harder time, you know, helping their kids develop. And then you get the behavioral issues, you get the, you know, harder challenges to learn and things like that. Can you talk a little bit more about, you know, how you sort of assess those issues that are kind of arising in our youth and education?
Sure. So one of the major things is that kids with autism and ADHD, based on covd.org, that's the College of Optometrics and Vision Development, they perceive that something like 40% of those kids are more likely to have vision issues that are going undetected. And general vision assessments are missing 50 or 60% of the vision problems we have in general in our population. So the easiest thing to do to assess for, it's easier to do in older kids, but even if you just have an object that you can hold in front of your kiddo's eyes, have them hold their head still and just see if they can track with their eyes moving smoothly from left to right. And they can do that up and down, just in a small circle, to see if their eyes are working together. Those are called smooth pursuits. So you can also do something called saccadic eye movements by just having them look here and then over here. You can also do that with like a lighted little pen or flashlight, just to see if they can move their eyes back and forth.
Yeah, you were doing that really well, by the way, for those that can't see this. I was not following it at all. I'm just sort of staring into the camera. So maybe I need some help already. And we were talking a little earlier, even before we started recording, about, you know, nutrition in general, like trying to squeeze in meals and whatnot. And I know I am very often eating on the go or not eating at all for hours and hours, and then finally, you know, eating. What kind of role does that play in early development? You know, eating like bulge eating, like what's that word? Not bulge eating, but like eating a lot at one time and then not during the rest of the day, or like what do you?
In regards to what you're talking about, a lot of, in my training, I'll take a step back a minute. We talk about, there's actually 8 sensory systems in our body. We have our common ones, our smell, touch, taste, but we also have 3 that are called the vestibular system, the interoceptive system, and our proprioceptive system. So our proprioceptive system is just receptors that live in our muscles, joints, and our tendons. And our vestibular system gives us information about where we are in space and time, our head position. Our interoceptive system gives us awareness about the inside of our body and how we're feeling, like our heart rate, or if we have to go to the bathroom, or if we're feeling hungry. And so many of these kids, they will eat a lot all at once. And just want to eat, because the parts of their body, their on-off switches for certain things are either always on or always off. And so they can't really say that they're hungry because they don't feel it. And so you get some of these strange eating behaviors in a lot of these kids. In regards to eating in general, I have so many kids in early intervention that have reflux. That generally what happens is that when I refer them to a developmental pediatrician who then assesses for blood work, we find that they actually have a gluten and or a dairy intolerance or some other intolerance that's actually causing the reflux. But what I'm trying to bring more awareness to is that by putting them on reflux medicine, that affects their ability to digest foods properly, which can lead to nutritional deficiencies, but never addresses the original problem of a gluten or dairy intolerance. So whenever you're not getting to the root cause of that problem, and the kid is still having reflux issues, maybe that, you know, they're putting reflux meds, but maybe there's still some issues there. When kids are having reflux, it affects their behavior because they want to stay in a certain position because they know if they move a lot, they're going to throw up and that's going to burn them. So now you get kids that don't want to move and they're not developing motor patterns of behavior. They're not developing through, you know, rolling and crawling and cruising along furniture and walking because they know that it hurts to move. But by having a greater awareness around, okay, maybe this kiddo needs to be on a dairy-free formula. Or maybe if mom is breastfeeding, that she needs to be more mindful of what she eats, because then you really get to the root cause. So that's why I take a holistic approach to all of this, because until you solve the root cause of that behavior, it's really, I don't want to say ineffective, but it creates an inefficient system where maybe that practitioner is getting burnout because they're using all the tricks of the trade that they know, but you're not really getting to the heart of the problem. So there's a lot of issues that we deal with around feeding and
well, you're sort of like responding to the symptoms rather than to the cause of the symptoms. So you're just kind of
Exactly.
like, yeah. So I get it. So they're always going to be on that medication because you're not going to really get to what the root of the problem is. And I know with some of the diseases or conditions that, you deal with, like you mentioned, celiacs, like you often don't find out that that's the actual problem until way, way, way into like adulthood, sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the methods that you do use to help people identify those things
Well,
earlier?
you can go to celiac.org to
Okay.
find more information. You can do a survey. Finding out just what is gluten and what is dairy. If people think that that is a problem for them, they can go to celiac.org and fill out those assessments. There's resources out there.
Mm-hmm.
But for people that are curious about it, you can also do something called a food mood diary. And this is for some of the parents that I've talked to before, older children. Do a food mood diary. So just keep a list of everything that you eat and drink for 3 days
Mm-hmm.
and see how you feel afterwards. If you're getting diarrhea or vomiting, or some people get bloating, or in my own kids, we just got blood work back last week that they have to be gluten-free and dairy-free.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever, even for myself, I have to be gluten-free and dairy-free. So personally, like whenever I eat gluten, when I wake up the next morning, I'm more irritable and more agitated. In my kids, I see it in the form of like more OCD behaviors,
Right.
that they're kind of very rigid. And so it comes out as behavior, right? When
Right.
it's really not behavior, it's the biochemistry of their body that's altered, that we need to really work as a team. It's not to discredit any one silo of approaches, right? It's how can we all work together to help this kid. It's not like,
Mm-hmm.
let's fight amongst ourselves.
Right.
Like, let's really take a good look at everything that could be going on with these kids, asking the right questions, making the right referrals, and then creating some interventions in the meantime to create long-term success for that kid and those families.
Yeah, and when I first started talking to you, what I found interesting was like, I had never thought about some other underlying things that could be causing behavioral issues. You have, my wife is a teacher, and I was studying to be a teacher for a while. And when you interact with certain types of kids, you're like, well, why are they that way? Um, and that's just something that never popped into my head, that it could have to do with diet, could have to do with, um, those types of things. So, one of the reasons I asked you to be on the show was, I'm like, I know that there are a lot of people that just don't realize that. And there's parents out there, that might not know why their child is acting the way they're acting, and some of the behavioral things have come up, but also some of just the warning signs.
Mm-hmm.
That you described to me in our earlier conversation. Can you talk a little bit about like some of those things that we were chatting about, as far as early warning signs and
Yeah.
um, and how
One
to
of the
identify?
one of the things that we had talked about specifically that comes to mind is C-section birth.
Mhm.
So, and there's a lot of information on PubMed that talks about the gut microbiome. So, just in simple terms, if you don't pass through the vaginal canal for birth, you're not exposed to the vaginal flora. And there's implications to be more likely to have celiac disease and to have asthma and to have some different problems, because when you pass through that vaginal canal, that flora inundates all our mucosal membranes. So it's going into our eyes, our ears, our nose, it's going down into our stomachs
Mhm.
and our intestines. And so you have to maintain a good balance of good and bad bacteria, because that's our immune response. That's how we digest food. And that, there are certain processes that human DNA cannot do, that we're reliant on that symbiotic relationship with gut bacteria.
Right.
And so when you don't have enough gut bacteria, you have problems with immune function. You have problems with, digesting foods completely, breaking down foods and using them efficiently.
Mhm.
But another thing that we talked about too, related to that, is like allergies, intolerances, and sensitivities. When you're eating like gluten and dairy, or things that you're allergic to consistently, it can cause a breakdown in your epithelial barrier in your stomach.
Right.
So the epithelial cells are just basically, the cell wall of your stomach. And so whenever you have a breakdown in that, it leads to leaky gut. And leaky gut just means that things that should be in your stomach and intestines are now getting into your bloodstream.
Mm-hmm.
And those can be like long chain amino acids from gluten that can then start to cause autoimmunity. It can be Lyme from Lyme's disease. It can be strep B bacteria that causes pandas. So that's like autism-like symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And so much human disease and disorder is related to imbalances in gut bacteria in the brain, which
Right.
brings me to the other aspect of C-section. So it's not just about the gut, the vaginal flora. You have to go through certain movement patterns to be born.
Mm-hmm.
And, your head is pushing up and your shoulders are moving together. So for those that are interested in looking, it would be primitive reflexes. So they can become unintegrated at any time in our lives,
Mm-hmm.
but they're involuntary movement patterns that we have to it's like Jenga blocks, that as we grow in age, we go through these movement patterns. And as we get higher level movement patterns, it inhibits the slower level movements.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these kids, you can find charts online, just primitive reflex charts that talk about, if you pretend like you're striking a match and you go up the one side the kid's spine and they kind of have this movement to the side,
Mm-hmm.
that's a primitive reflex that's been retained. And so those are the kids that can't sit still in school because their shirt's rubbing up against them and teacher says, just sit still, just do it.
Right.
And it's so much of this behavior, Nick, is about, it's not that the kid won't do it, it's that they cannot do the things that we're asking them to do.
Right.
And so by not taking a holistic approach, we're limiting their abilities and kind of keeping them caught in their own bodies.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at things holistically is that's the way of the future. So
Well, it's very interesting. And, who'd have thought that all these things are connected and that something that happened so long ago could affect, a child much later in life. I definitely didn't know any of this. And that's why I'm like, what? So how did you get into researching all this and really kind of, this is sort of almost like a passion, right? So like, how did that develop for you?
I well, we have to go way back for that. I was
Sure.
in third grade, and my teacher at the time had asked for volunteers for kids that wanted to take their recess time and go next door.
Mm-hmm.
And next door was the special needs classroom. And I volunteered.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of never looked back. There was kids in wheelchairs, and I remember playing cards. I have a visual memory. I remember playing cards with another student that was in a wheelchair, and just the smile that it brought to their face.
Mm-hmm.
Just simple interactions and things that we can do to bring such joy to other people with special needs.
Right.
So it all started back then, but really as I went through my degree, I went to Penn State for my undergrad in human development and family studies.
Mm-hmm.
And then my master's was in applied behavior analysis. So applied behavior analysis is all about looking at observable and measurable behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And my undergrad was looking at, well, this is how the inside of the body matures, and this is the inside of the inner workings of a human. So it was very conflicting, if
Right.
you will. So it's like, this is everything on the outside and this is everything on the inside. And as I was working in early intervention for the last 6 years on multidisciplinary teams, so it was like OTs and PTs and nutritionists, and everybody they had their own approach. And I saw that some of my colleagues were getting burnout, and I'm like, well, you all have valid points. Let's see how we can work together. And so I just started researching, like, okay, what does a nutritionist do? What does an occupational therapist do? How do I, as a behaviorist, create something that's a measurable, observable assessment for that problem so that I can integrate it into my practice and then tell other people about it?
Mm-hmm.
And so really it started in third grade, but it's just blossomed because I just have this really big interest in helping people. And I'll share a personal bit of information. Last week, I was actually told that I'm borderline high functioning autism. So it fits well because I've always had issues with like gluten sensitivities and dairy sensitivities and personal relationships. So it's kind of like, if you really want to know how you look in that outfit, I'll tell you. But it's been my passion. It's kind of like when, and everybody on the spectrum is a little bit different, but my focus has been on autism and looking at the biochemistry of the body and truly how can we create a holistic experience. So through not just my professional journey, it's been a personal passion of mine because the dietary changes help affect my behavior and my interactions with my family. So
Right, right. And you have an interesting perspective, because I don't think there's a lot of people that have like done the internal study and what we might call the external study, as far as looking at the whole human holistically, like you're saying. It's like you have specialists in one area, but maybe not the other. And from what you're describing, there's just a lot of like symbiosis between the two that both affect each other. It's kind of like important that you have someone like yourself that can kind of actively read both sides and have experienced both sides. Am I correct in that assumption, where there aren't a lot of people that are doing what you do? Or
right, yeah, and I'd like to create more of that.
right.
That's the thing. But yeah, I would like to be able to, and there are people out there that are doing it and they're creating content, but sometimes it's dismissed and it's almost trying to convince people to buy into science, which is peculiar because
Right.
it's science. For
There
me, it's
seems to
kind
have been a lot of that lately,
yeah,
buying into
yeah.
science in general. But
So there have been people that have done it before, but it's kind of like it's maybe time for another generation to step forward and do it with more passion and purpose and just keep pushing, because there's just such small modifications. Just like I played cards with that kiddo with
right.
special needs in third grade, just such small modifications, Nick. Like if we could get OBs to be more cognizant about having conversations with new moms that have just had C-sections about the implications that that absence of the vaginal flora will have on their kiddos' gut microbiome, but also having an awareness for those OBs about primitive reflexes, having those conversations and just maybe handing them a piece of paper or something. When you have a
Yeah.
baby, it's a lot. My
Yeah.
son was born at 33 weeks and 2 days, so he has his own challenges, but
Right.
going through that, you're overwhelmed. But making sure that the OB would even, follow up with that family at a visit when they have a one-on-one with the mom, and have those conversations, or to make coursework more rigorous around nutrition for pediatricians,
Right.
and to talk to families about, when they give their kiddos antibiotics, to make sure that they give pre and probiotics to restore that gut bacteria. It's just
Are,
very small things.
yeah. No, and I'm sure that they're, pediatricians have to read a lot of information
They do.
on a variety of different things. And, they have to sort of be experts in all forms of medicine and know how to refer and whatnot. So there's a good reason I'm not a pediatrician. There's probably a bunch of good reasons. Because I love learning, but retaining all of that, I think would be a challenge for me. But are there artificial ways to restore some of that when you have a C-section? Are there, therapies or anything that you can do earlier on that you're aware of that might help at that situation?
Yeah, so there are, and this is something that has to be researched and you have to consult with your OB and other medical professionals, but
Sure.
there are researchers out there that are actually swabbing babies. So after they have been born, they're working with the OB and the delivery team and everything. that they are very carefully swabbing babies after they're born with the mother's vaginal flora.
Okay.
So if it's a C-section baby, they will very carefully go through and make sure that the baby is coated, because then they get that vaginal flora. So there are different ways that you can do that, or now they make pre and probiotics for infants.
Yeah.
And toddlers.
I have
So
seen
there
that
are
before.
things out there. They're over the counter, but you want to make sure that you're finding something that's high quality,
Right.
consulting with medical professionals and getting something that's right for you.
Yeah, as with anything that you're, ingesting or putting in your bodies, make sure that it's the right thing,
Yeah.
talk to the expert. So,
Yes. Yes.
that's very important. Going back to the autism and children on the spectrum, some of my personal experiences with friends, children, in general, sometimes getting them to eat anything at all is extremely difficult. I'm thinking of one person in particular where they would only eat things that were really crispy in texture, nothing soft. So having to basically bake the heck out of stuff to make sure it was crispy enough. Do you see things that resulted in that, or do you know where I'm getting at? Like, are there?
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
the same rigidity, and that's that same like OCD behaviors, wanting to control the situation, rigidity in eating.
Mhm.
But some of it has to do with like primitive reflexes, like we talked about.
Right.
Like there's a rooting reflex that you can test that if you, again, it's like a match strike, just go up the side of the mouth. And if they have just a little twitch here after a certain age, and you can go to the primitive reflex charts and it'll tell you what age that should be gone by. And I think it's
Mhm.
like 6 months or something. But if that is still a persistent problem, that kiddo is going to have maybe drooling, speech and articulation problems chewing,
Mhm.
because the mouth, if you think about anatomically, has to get information from the left and right hemispheres of the brain.
Right.
So for speech, articulation, for eating. And so sometimes it has to do with like a gluten sensitivity, because or a nutritional deficiency. And again, you have to
Sure.
really get blood work to know what's going on in that kiddo's body. But the nutritional deficiencies, intolerances, allergies, and sensitivities can create that rigidity, but it can also be caused by that disruption in the overall movement patterns and that progression through those movement patterns known as primitive reflexes.
Right.
So again, you have to have a team of people that know how to assess for those things and look at those things. So like an OT that specializes in primitive reflexes. If you think that your kiddo has a vision problem, you can refer to a developmental optometrist
Right.
that specializes in behavior and working through primitive reflexes. They work with stroke patients, patients that have had tumors of all ages. So
Right.
it's about knowing what questions to ask, who to refer to, and what to do.
So your organization kind of focuses more on those professionals, right? And how to educate them, not so much the direct client kind of like kiddos, right?
Yeah, well, I work in early intervention too as a special instructor.
Sure.
But yes, the reason I did that is because instead of working from family to family to family, if I can work with a professional that has
Right.
contact with 30 families, then that amplifies the effect.
Sure.
And so it creates a bigger reach. It's just what I'm passionate about. I love working with adults, educating adults about this, and just creating dynamic, immersive content that people just really, really enjoy. I miss being in person with people.
Right.
So I'm looking forward
Me
to get
too.
back to that. But right now it's all on Zoom.
Yeah.
So
As is a lot of different things.
I
So
know.
no, but I think that that's a great point to make. And the only reason I ask is because, I want my audience to have the ability to like reach out to you in the right way. So if they're a professional, they're more likely to get service by you, but I'm sure you have advice for families that are looking for those specific doctors and things like that. And I'm going to be listing all your contact information and, social media and stuff like that in the show notes. So we'll definitely have ways to contact you. Can we talk a little bit more about the nonprofit? Now, I know that's something that's like on the horizon that you really want to do. What are some of the challenges that you're just facing in getting that started right now, and how might some of the listeners be able to help?
Yeah, so I'm looking for money to help it, get off the ground and going. Anybody that is passionate about helping start the nonprofit, um, working with that autism community, kids with special needs with behaviors. Um, yeah, but it's basically money and managers, people that
Mhm.
can, work with me that are passionate about it to get everything going. So anybody that has a history in the nonprofit sector, managerial, HR,
Mhm.
secretarial, administrative, those things are really, really helpful right now.
Yeah, no, so I urge any listener to reach out to Kristen that might have some information. It sounds like somebody that also might have experience in the nonprofit sectors, and especially in the medical kind of field or
Mhm.
health and wellness. So that'd be very helpful as well. Is there anything, I like to always ask this question to make sure that I cover everything that the guest wants to talk about. Is there anything that I missed or that you definitely want the audience to know about the things that you're doing, or um, I just didn't ask?
Yeah, well, I have a vision for creating um, a larger organization that focuses on filling some of those gaps. So people that can help with course development, people that can help with policy analysis, legislation initiatives, and this is a long-term goal. But I have a long-term vision for how I want to to broaden this horizon. Um, but if anybody gets involved, be prepared because I've been told it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. So
There's a lot that goes into it. Yeah, I'm
yeah,
sure.
I can be pretty intense. So yeah, but yeah, just anybody that's interested in taking that holistic approach to really, really help people. Um, yeah, so I have a big vision for the future. My daughter drew. This is something I've been talking about during my networking meetings. Is my daughter drew. I have the bluebird here. I love bluebirds. So my daughter drew it and put it in a bird bath, and she drew a tree here and clouds and sun. So it's kind of like some people can see the roots that are underneath the tree, but the way that my mind works is I see the roots, the tree, and the forest. And so, people that are committed and that can have a growth mindset and that are really, really motivated. Um, yeah.
No, I totally get what you're saying, because like when I'm looking at a problem or when I'm looking at a goal or something like that, I see the whole big picture. And it sounds like you see even a little bit more than that. You go a little bit further. You're like, not only the Earth, but I see the galaxy too.
Mhm.
But the thing that's different is I also enjoy like putting the puzzle together, and like kind of having those steps of where how do you get to that big, audacious goal and, be successful.
Mhm.
Um, but what I'm also hearing in everything you're saying is that you do have these great goals, but you also have already kind of compartmentalized. I can't even say that word. You've put them into little compartments, and you've already started that. So like, yeah, I want to do, this, I want to do, that, and everything will build up to the
Mhm.
big picture. So as long as you can look at it from that way, I think you're golden, because you can like find the volunteers and you can find, the right hires to help you with those specific things. And running a nonprofit, obviously you're always wearing many, many different hats, and you're going to be running a nonprofit, but also having like a business that's sort of attached in the same field. So it's going to be, an interesting adventure. And like I said, I think this is just something that I really want to spread the word about, because I think it's important, for parents to understand maybe why their kid is doing something that they're doing. The same thing with teachers, and just kind of having just a little bit more patience, or at least understanding about why some child is acting up, you know because so often we kind of concentrate on the actual behavior, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying before. We treat the symptom, not the root cause.
Mhm.
So I really think the work that you do is very terrific. And
Oh, thank you.
and getting that word out there is really important. And I hope that my audience can help spread the word about the very important work that you're doing. So thank you, Kristan, for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Nick, for having me. I appreciate it.
And I'm looking forward to seeing all those dreams and the nonprofit come to fruition and come true for you. So thanks again so much.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you for joining us in another episode of That Sounds Terrific. Don't forget to check out the show notes and our website at thatsoundsterrific.com to find the contact information and the best ways to volunteer with the organizations that we feature. If you know someone that is doing terrific things and think they should be featured in a future episode, be sure to email us their name, contact info, and short description of what they're doing at thatsoundsterrific@gmail.com. If you like our show, give us a 5-star rating and give us some social media love by liking our Facebook page, That Sounds Terrific. Follow us on Twitter at Sounds Terrific 2 and Instagram at Sounds Terrific. We love hearing your feedback on how to make our show sound even more terrific. Till next time.